The computers of today are immensely more complex than the computers of the past, and the problems we put to them are complex as well. Early computers were designed to solve problems that were near impossible for a person to solve. The earliest computers were mechanical, which I'm not going to try to understand, but I will show pictures of them. Later computers became electric, and eventually built with no moving parts at all. Moore's law states that the number of transistors on a computer doubles every 2 years. That means that computers of today are approximately 33,554,432 times more powerful than the computers of 50 years ago. From the 1810s to the 1970s, there were 4 major breakthroughs in computer processor technology that I would like to discuss. Charles Babbage was a mathematician and inventor who had some brilliant ideas. He lived from 1791 to 1871, and in the 1810s he was working on mechanical calculators. His projects were successful enough that the British government funded him to make a hand-powered mechanical calculator, which he called the difference engine. It was hand-powered but not pocket-sized. The machine was designed to be about 11 feet long. Its purpose was to do calculations on large polynomials. It was designed with disks to store numbers, and each disk represented a digit in a number. Unlike modern computers, it was base 10, so the disks had sides 0 to 9 to store a value. Modern computers are base 2, which means that they have zeros and ones to store values. The projects began in 1823 and lasted until 1833, when the machinists building the computers stopped getting paid. Even as Babbage designed and built the difference engine, he imagined another one, more powerful, which he would call the analytical engine. The analytical engine was never actually built by him, but he worked on its design until his death. The machine was supposed to store 1,000 numbers, each up to 50 digits long, which was more than any computer built until the 1960s. It would read instructions off of punch cards. The next major breakthrough I found was about vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes were a revolutionary invention that led to the best of early electronic computers. The first vacuum tubes were invented by John Ambrose Fleming in 1904. However, the effects of the technology were already known to others such as Thomas Edison. This is because vacuum tubes are essentially light bulbs. What makes them special? When light bulbs are lit, they emit light, but they also emit electrons. Electrons shoot off of the hot filament but can't escape the glass bulb. Vacuum tubes are able to capture the electrons with a positively charged plate. They are able to control the flow of electrons through the vacuum with a control grid between the filament and the plate. This kind of vacuum tube has 4 terminals instead of 2 like regular light bulb would have. 2 are to light the filament, 1 is for the control grid, and 1 is for the plate. When a voltage is applied to the grid, it becomes negatively charged, and the electrons are repelled by it and cannot get to the plate. This cuts the circuit. When the grid is neutral, the electrons pass by and collide with the plate. This completes the circuit. In this way, a vacuum tube can work like an on and off switch, but with no moving parts at all. Vacuum tubes proved to be extremely useful and even affected World War II for the better. Vacuum tubes were used to construct computers used by the military. These computers were used in submarines to aim missiles, and they were used to break the German Enigma code, and they were used for firing tables. The Ballistics Research Laboratory needed to provide the military with firing tables, which would provide people with statistics on a certain weapon. It was nearly impossible for a mathematician to do the calculations for the firing tables manually, and the BRL was looking for better options. They funded the construction of the ENIAC, which was built in 1954. It was one of the first fully electronic programmable computers and could perform a variety of tasks, and it was built with over 17,000 vacuum tubes. It was designed by John Muckley and J. Presper Eckert. The ENIAC had some major advantages and some drawbacks compared to other mechanical computers that came before it. It was fully electronic with no moving parts, which made it incredibly fast compared to others. It was programmed through plug boards instead of punch cards. Punch cards were much too slow and had too many glitches. Plug boards were much more efficient. The drawback was that plug boards are very complicated and not friendly at all for programming. It would take the programming team weeks of work every time they made a change to the programming. This type of computer technology was so new that it was very fragile. vacuum tubes had to be replaced very often, unlike the next breakthrough. Transistors. Transistors are one of the greatest inventions in history, probably the greatest invention in computer history. They were invented by Walter Brattain and John Bardeen and William Shockley in 1947, but it seemed nobody cared about them for a while after the first one was built. They did basically the same thing as vacuum tubes, but at the current time, vacuum tubes were the better option. Transistors were too fragile. When it was created, the inventors thought it would only be useful for military radio equipment. How wrong they were. Transistors have major advantages over vacuum tubes, such as being smaller and using less power. Soon, various companies such as Bell Labs, Texas Instruments, and Sony realized their potential and started using them for other things. Texas Instruments constructed a portable radio using this technology, and the radio was actually called a transistor. Eventually, new computers were built with transistors instead of vacuum tubes. One of the earliest transistor-based computers was called the Transistor Digital Computer, or the TRADIC. In 1954, Bell Laboratories built the TRADIC for the Air Force. It had 700 transistors and ran on just 100 watts of power, much less than vacuum tube computers. The TRADIC was designed by Gene H. Felker and James R. Harris. The next major milestone for computer processors was the invention of the microchip. While transistors are the most important bit in modern computers, microchips, also known as integrated circuits, are the reason computers can be so powerful. The microchip was invented by Jack Kilby, who was part of Texas Instruments in 1959. Microchips are essentially many small transistors built on a silicon wafer that is built up in many layers. Kilby's idea was, instead of using a bunch of wires to connect transistors to circuit boards, he could have all the transistors built onto one chip with connections built in between them. This would simplify the massive problem of dealing with a bunch of wires. This allowed new computers to be built much denser. In 1965, Gordon E. Moore observed the rate computers were advancing with the new microchip technology. He stated that the number of transistors on a chip would double every 2 years. This became known as Moore's Law, and it is still true today, although people debate whether it will always be true when transistors are at atomic sizes. With every new technological advancement, computers became cheaper, faster, and easier to manufacture. Computers today are much more than what they were in the past because of these technological breakthroughs. The people who invented these things were discovering simple mechanics, but they saw their potential and built them into computers. These people have affected the entire world with their inventions. Yeah, thank you for your time and thank you for listening. Everything's going great. Yeah.